Hi guys, I'm back to read more. The Wild Robot Escapes, and so we're picking up with chapter 32, and that chapter is called The Old Barn. Long ago, Hilltop Farm was a very different place. The original farmers grew vegetable gardens and fruit orchards, and they raised chickens and sheep and goats. The farm has changed a lot since then, but there were still signs of its past. Low stone walls lined some of the fields. A rusty tractor sat in the weeds. And hidden deep within a densely wooded grove was the old barn. The barn hadn't been used in generations. Over the years, trees had quietly grown up around it and moss had spread across its roof. But the barn was still strong and solid, and Roz wanted to take a look inside. The big barn door screeched along its rails. "Hello," said the robot, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone here?" A mouse squeaked and scurried out of sight, and then Roz had the barn to herself. She stepped through the doorway and switched on her headlights. The vast interior was crisscrossed with thick wooden beams. Stairways and ramps led up to the lofts and platforms. Lanterns hung from hooks on the walls. Old-fashioned farm equipment lay here and there. The barn still had the faint smell of farm animals, even though none had lived there in ages. A large trunk sat on a work table, covered in dust. Roz carefully opened the lid and examined its contents. A collection of farming magazines, a pair of leather gloves, a pencil nub, and then she noticed a small journal. The name Cyrus Sharif was elegantly scrawled across its cover. The pages were filled with his handwritten notes and hand-drawn diagrams about raising livestock and growing crops and building barns, about working the land with the help of strong animals and simple machines. Cyrus Sharif had also jotted down his thoughts about the long history of farming. He believed that the modern world owed its entire existence to ancient farms, when early humans first started growing their food. Those farms were small and primitive, but they supported villages, which became towns, which became cities. There's a picture of Roz as she's entering the barn. The writings were so wise and insightful that Roz read the journal from cover to cover. By the end, she almost felt as if she knew Cyrus Sharif, whoever he was. The journal was a treasure, and she tucked it into a pocket of her tool belt for safekeeping. Chapter 33, The Autumn. Autumn colors were sweeping across farm country. The lush greens of summer faded to reds and browns. Crops were harvested, leaves fell away, and the landscape turned stark and gray. On Hilltop Farm, the cows were grazing on what remained of the pasture grass, while the herding machine hovered nearby. The field machine was preparing the fields for winter. The drones circled the farm several times a day, but there was less to report in autumn. Although Jay and Jad were busy with school, they always made time for Roz. The children never grew tired of listening to the robot's stories. The children they never grew tired of sharing their own. The bees and the mice and the deer and the frogs, and the raccoons and the squirrels and the snakes were all getting ready for cold weather. So too were the birds. The owls spruced up their nests. The crows stockpiled acorns. The swallows were still swooping over the farmland, but they would soon be leaving for winter. And any day now, other migratory birds would begin passing through on their long journeys to the south. Chapter 34 is called The Delighted Geese. A flock of geese had just landed at Hilltop Farm. It was the first flock of the autumn migration. These geese floated on the pond, cleaning their feathers and nibbling on the weeds. But they all stopped what they were doing when Roz waved and said hello. The robot never forgot a face, and she was certain she didn't know any of these geese. But they seemed to know her. Before she even introduced herself, the lead goose squawked, "Is your name Roz?" The robot stared at the goose. "Yes, it is." "And you can speak the animal language?" The answer was obvious, but Roz politely said, "Yes, I can speak the animal language." "Do you, by any chance, have a goose for a son?" "Yes, I do," said Roz. "His name is Brightbill." At that, a voice blurted out, "The stories are true!" And suddenly the flock was smiling and fluttering over to the robot. When the commotion settled down, the leader explained, "All along our migration, we've heard rumors about a robot who can speak with animals, who has a goose for a son, and who is was trapped on a farm. That sounded ridiculous, but here you are. The flock was absolutely delighted to meet our robot. They lounged around the pond for a couple of days, chatting with Roz whenever she came by, and then they continued flying south to their wintering grounds. Another flock of geese arrived, and the same thing happened all over again. Roz welcomed them, and they were delighted to meet the legendary robot. And then the flock continued south. Then it happened again and again. Before long, the coming and going of delighted geese was just another part of the robot's autumn routine. Straggling behind the others, as usual, was Wingtip's flock. When Roz saw them splashing onto the pond, she felt something like hope that they might have news of her son. Sadly, the geese had no news to report, and as the flock took off and left Roz behind, she began to question whether she'd ever see Brightbill again. Chapter 35 is called The Memories. Roz still dreamed of escaping, of going home, of reuniting with her son, but her dreams were starting to feel impossible. Was it time for the robot to accept her new life and just forget her old one? She was losing hope. Forget. Roz was troubled by that word. You see, her computer brain remembered every detail of her life on the island, and it hurt to think that she may never make it back there. However, the robot could always forget. She could erase her old memories. It would be like they never happened. The heaviness she now felt would vanish. But without her memories, who would she be? No, Roz wanted to remember her old life, which was good because someone from her old life was about to appear. It's interesting because it seems like that would be really easy for Roz now. It's been a long time since she's been home, and just like rebooting or cutting off all memories in her past, then she would never know. But I think we know Roz well enough to know that that's not something she would ever really do. She'd think about it, but she wouldn't do it. Chapter 36 is called The Unusual Flock. Another flock of geese was approaching the farm, but this flock was unusual. It wasn't flying south like the others. It was flying north in a perfect V formation, and it was led by a young, graceful goose. The flock flew once around the farm buildings and then delicately touched down in the barnyard. The leader whispered some words to the others, and then he fluttered in through the barn door. The cows looked up from their stalls as the goose perched himself on a railing near the middle of the barn. Then the goose cleared his throat, shook his tail feathers, and announced, "I am looking for a robot named Roz. My name is Brightbill. I am her son." Chapter 37 is called The Reunion. Something was wrong with the cows. Their excited moves echoed from the barn and across the farm. Roz sent the milk truck away for its evening deliveries and hurried off to see what all this ruckus was about. When she stepped into the barn, she found the entire herd crowded together. As the robot started pushing her way through, the cows turned to her and smiled. Great part in the story to stop, visualize, make a mind movie. What do you see? What do you picture this scene that's unfolding in front of us looking like? And then Roz saw him, her beloved son, Brightbill. As you know, reader, robots, they don't feel emotions, not the way animals do. But in that moment, in that barn, nobody had any doubt about how Roz felt. She rushed forward and scooped her son into her arms. "Brightbill," she cried, "is it really you?" Very sweet. Finally, they're reunited. I feel like if we were in class right now, we'd all be clapping. So, woo! It's really me. And I still kind of feel like, even though I'm doing this like younger voice, even though Brightbill's grown up, I feel like that's his voice, so that's why I'm doing it. Brightbill nuzzled his mother's face. "But how did you find me?" said Roz. "Ma, you're famous. You are all anyone could talk about at the wintering grounds. It started with the flocks of geese that stopped here on their migrations. They shared your story with everyone they met. Your story spread from flock to flock, from north to south, from east to west. Eventually, your story made its way to me. I took off as soon as I heard where you were. I didn't even tell the others, but we caught up to him." Loudwing, the old goose, fluttered over the herd and gently landed on a cow's back. Brightbill wasn't the only one who wanted to see you, Roz. The rest of the flock appeared, and the robot found herself surrounded by old friends and family. Squawking and mooing and laughing and cheering filled the barn. But then came a loud, clear voice that only the robot understood. Roz, what are you doing? The animals hushed. Roz slowly turned around, and there were Jay and Jad standing in the doorway. The children had seen everything.